the Contrarians panel discussion. We're going to be talking about Judas Priest, Turbo. This is the Dark Horse session. So what we'll do is we'll go around and each of you will get to say whether you're in favor of this album or you don't like it. You'll get to give a review score. We will then at the very end tally up all those review scores, get an average, and we can do a bit of a group discussion. So just a reminder to everyone, if we can be concise when we're sharing, you don't have to, rush through everything, but if we can try and make sure that no one's speaking for, half the time we got, that way everyone gets their chance to go through. And just a reminder, I'm sure you're all aware, but the Contrarians YouTube channel is still up and running. You can see Martin there, and a few of yourselves have also been on some episodes and some ones that are coming out. So make sure to keep checking that out. Obviously, you all know about the Patreon, but we got that going too. And if you know people who want to be part of the discussion, let them know, and they can get on this as well. Before we get to everyone's opinions, I'm going to read out some research that Marco's got for us. I don't really have a horse in this dark horse race here, so I'm just going to read off what Marco did. So all credit should go to him for that. All right, so Turbo is Judas Priest's 10th studio album, released in 1986. It charted at 56 and went platinum in the US. The single Turbo Lover charted at 44, and Locked In charted at 25. Parental Guidance is the third single, which did not chart. On metalkingdom.net, all the Judas Priest songs were ranked by various votes from the users, and no song from Turbo pops up on the list until number 44, and that is the song Turbo Lover. The number one ranked song was Painkiller from Painkiller, which makes a lot of sense. Also on metalkingdom.net is a list of the Judas Priest albums ranked, including live albums, and Turbo is ranked number 16 based on votes, with Painkiller being ranked at number 1, which again makes a lot of sense. All Star Music gave it a review of 2.5 stars. I'm not going to read out the whole review because I think we've got the gist of it already, and I'm going to pass it along. So I'm just going to go in order of who's on the top of the Zoom strip here. So it's not alphabetical or by importance or anything like that. And Martin, I'll let you get a choice. Would you like to go last or first?
Let me go first for once. Yeah, I usually
all right.
Last my energy wanes, so whatever. I'll be brief as well. I think. So this record, I really I didn't like it when it first came out. Then I liked it quite a bit more, and then kind of reviewing for this show again, playing it a few times, I realized there's not a heck of a lot of it that I like a lot. Two of my, let's not go too far, not two of my favorite Priest songs, but two really, really, really good Priest songs. They'd probably make my top 25 maybe, would be Turbo Lover, the first song on the whole album, and Reckless, the last song on the whole album. So I really like those two a lot. But going through it, I know a lot of people like Out in the Cold. To me, that's a little of an overrated song. I'm not a big Out of the Cold fan. I certainly despise Parental Guidance. I don't think that's a very good song at all. And what I kind of noticed is that the other songs that I thought I liked quite a bit, kind of have a rotten chord to them. They have kind of a not a great chorus. Although having said that, I would say that Hot for Love is also quite good. I like that quite a bit, and I liked Locked In quite a bit. But that's a good example of one of these that I like most of it, but I don't like the chorus too much. And then you get this kind of dumbed down Scorpions vibe that's coming in, obviously with a title like Rock You All Around the World. But yeah, you're starting to get a little bit of that Love at First Sting, Savage Amusement, Scorpions feel in some of these, I think. Wild Nights, Hot and Crazy Days. They're like stealing all the Scorpions song titles, essentially, right? But yeah, I don't think that's a very good one either. Like I say, I do like Hot for Love. Private Property is quite decent. I like the chord changes in that, pretty dark, cool chord changes. Not happy about Rock You All Around the World either. One thing that I do think is quite cool about it is I do like the innovative production on it. When I go back now to Screaming and Defenders, I find those almost unlistenable because of the production. The drum sound on those, I much prefer the drum sound here, and just the overall sound picture. I don't even mind the synthesizer so much. What I'm really hating is the sing-songy hair metal choruses put on a lot of this stuff. We know Rob Halford was going through a lot of troubles in his love life and drinking and the coke, and having just read his autobiography recently, I realized he has a little bit less attachment to Priest as a musician, as a writer, and all that I kind of would wish that he would have to this band. And this is where the separation got the worst. I don't think his heart or his head, or his brain was in this record very much, since it's definitely not a very brainy record. So for all those reasons, liking quite a few songs, loving a couple songs, pretty happy with the production on this, I'm going to go 6.5 out of 10.
All right. So
I think that's 0.5 higher than your original.
Yes.
Is it? So I'm pretty consistent. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. Great review. And I guess we'll move right along. So John, let's get you up to bat next then. You have the spotlight.
All right. Thank you, Nick. This album for me, this brings back so many memories from 1986 in high school. I remember we had a college station that had a metal show, and one night I missed when they played Turbo Lover, and some buddies of mine was like, man, that's all full of guitar synthesizer. And then I'm like, but then the next night I heard it and they played Reckless, and I'm like, there was no guitar synthesizer on that, man. I love that track. And to this day, that would probably be a top 5 Priest song for me. That just was like a battle cry for me back in the day. I just attached so many memories with this album. There's some songs that I like, and then there's some songs I'm not so crazy about, but it's an album that just has great memories. Turbo Lover, especially. Out in the Cold, I did really like that one. I like that slow moodiness of it. Locked In, even though the video was kind of interesting. Parental Guidance and Private Property were okay. Rock You All Around the World was okay. I could, as a 16-year-old kid though, I'm sure I was screaming every lyric at the top of my lungs. But to this day, Turbo Lover and Reckless, just like Martin said, still probably my favorite songs from this album, very much so. One thing I was noticing though about this Turbo 30 packaging, I just got to bring this up real quick. So maybe it was just because of the whole, they just didn't have enough room. But poor Dave Holland, he doesn't even get a picture on this thing, and you only see like a couple pictures of him, one in a group band, and then there's like a live shot. But I mean, he's like pretty much eclipsed off of this album, which I know he had some reasons for that. Yeah, and there was some, and I know there's a lot of good reasons for that. So I totally get that, but it's still a shame because he was a very integral part of the band at the time. But even though there was a lot of electronic drums with this album, but I did feel kind of. I know there was a lot of stuff with him, but anyway, for me, I would actually give this album, I can give this a 7.5, and that's only because the memories of the songs that I love really drive this one, but the ones that I don't like kind of go down a little bit. 7.5.
Right. 7.5. Got it. Nice.
All right. Okay. Well, Todd, let's get you up next.
Okay. Well, I'll give you some background on my history with Judas Priest. When I was like 9th, 10th grade, this is like 78, 79, me and my friends who listened to music, we listened to music a lot. and we listened to metal and prog rock and post-punk and new wave and punk all at the same time, and it was all happening then. And so there weren't that many metal bands that we listened to, but we listened to Judas Priest quite often, and we liked them a lot, and we all thought that Rob Halford was just a great singer, and we thought they'd go prog. We thought they would take a route like Rush did, just because Halford was such a great singer. I thought that that's what they would do. But I moved on and kind of gravitated more towards the post-punk new wave prog area. And so, but I always kept a really kind of a good attitude about Judas Priest. I worked in a record store in the 80s, and all those records came out in the 80s, and we played them in the store, and my friends that liked metal really liked them a lot. And so I always had a good attitude about them, even though they weren't one of my favorite bands. So the past 4 or 5 years, I just bought the whole catalog and had been just trying to get back into it and to learn all the albums. And I probably listened to this 3 times through in the last couple of days, and it was really probably the only time I've ever listened to the album all the way through. And I liked it a little more every time I heard it. I used to think that Turbo Lover was kind of a dumb song, but now I really like it a lot. There's lyrical problems with this album, but I think when you listen to a band like Judas Priest, you've got to kind of keep a sense of humor and not, knock them too much for that. I mean, I can see how the lyrical content of this album is probably a little bit worse than some of the others, but it doesn't really bother me that much. Like I said, I like Turbo Lover a lot. I like the guitar synths. I listened to Parental Guidance, and I always thought that I didn't like that song, and I really still don't. But when I was listening to it, this time I was thinking about the fact that it reminded me of something. I couldn't figure out what it was, and I figured out that it kind of reminds me of a Joan Jett song. And I think that if she had done that song, or if like Twisted Sister had done that song, I don't think anybody would have really taken any heat for it. I think it's just that people expect better from Judas Priest, and I agree. I actually thought Rocky Around the World was just as bad. But I think Out in the Cold and Hot for Love and Reckless are really fantastic. I think Hot for Love is my favorite. It suffers a little bit from that thing about not having a very good chorus. It's got great verses, and it's got a really cool bridge with like the dual guitar is almost like a guitar orchestration kind of a thing. And then the chorus comes in, and it sounds like they don't have one. But that's my only knock on that song. And I wish it had better lyrical content, and I wish it wasn't called Hot for Love. But overall, I really liked the album a lot. And I was thinking about, for a rating, giving it a 6.5, but I'm going to bump it up to a 7 because I thought that I think the guitar performances are really good. I like that in the liner notes of the remaster, they tell you who plays what solo. And I think that's really fun. And I think the guitar performances are really good. So I'm going to give them an extra half point. I'm going to say a 7.
Nice.
All right.
Good job. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so far we've got a lot of in favors. Maybe just on the side. Joe, why don't we get your view next, and we'll see what you think.
All right. So, welcome to another episode of When Great Bands Make Bad Albums. So, this goes along with the Hot Space episode. So I listened to this album for the first time in over 30 years the last 2 days, and when it first came out, I was pissed. What happened to the band that made Sinner, Stained Class, Hellbent for Leather? Screaming for Vengeance I liked, but I was kind of mad. Defenders of the Faith, I thought they were falling off there. Now they released Turbo in 1986. It just became such a depressing year of music for me, because you had Cliff Burton dying in Metallica, and you had Judas Priest releasing this garbage. That being said, when I listened to it yesterday, it wasn't as bad. I was kind of like, oh my God, what am I going to listen to? Turbo, in fact, when they played Turbo live lately with Richie Faulkner, it's heavy. It sounds really good. So it's not as bad as I initially thought it was. Then again, I haven't listened to it in over 30 years because I just was so put off by this. But again, I listened to it again today, and it's not very good. Turbo Lover's okay. Locked In is all right. private property, parental guidance is horrible. I mean, there's a few Wild Nights, Hot Crazy Days. I just can't get into this album at all. So I'm going to cut it short here. It's just, I guess it's not that bad if another band would have released it, but the fact this band was one of my top bands, a great band that did Hellbent for Leather, British Steel, Stained Class, and then they released this. I'm going to bump, originally I would have given it a 2. I'm going to bump it up to a 3 out of 10 for me.
Nice.
All right.
All right.
3 it is.
Ooh, 3. Okay. All right. Well, Joe has injected some life into this debate, so this is good. I can tell things are going to get lively. Here, Peter. Let's hear your response.
I guess it's Peter's retort to Joe, eh?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. I think where your view on this album is where you come into their discography. So it's like any band with a long discography. If you come into it in the 80s, around 1986, there's a lot of pop music, there's a lot of hair metal, there's a whole sort of different sort of music scape. If you're a Judas Priest fan from the 70s, it may be hard to take. And I think this is an extraordinarily brave album. I think sonically it is actually quite brainy, the way this was put together. I think it's one of the best sounding Judas Priest albums. There's anecdotal evidence that Rob Halford was interested in electronic music or electronica. So, look at the time this album came out. 1985, The Works with Queen, that was dabbling in a lot of sequences and synthesizers. So the Queen was one of Rob Halford's favourite bands, so his ears are on that. Before that, ZZ Top with Eliminator. I hear a lot of the sequence patterns in this, like Hot for Love, for example, very similar to ZZ Top and Eliminator. And even with his solo career where he got into industrial music, I mean, for God's sakes, they actually recorded an album which is in the vault with Stock Aitken and Waterman, who are famous for Bananarama, Kylie Minogue and Rick Astley. So they definitely had one toe in the pop market, and I think this was one where it was very brave that they were looking for a broader, more pop-orientated sound. And I think they do it really, really well. The synthesizer guitars, I don't think they're intrusive. I think they're textured. I think it actually makes it a little bit heavier as a soundscape. It's not, just going through the songs, I think Turbo Lover is probably top 20 Priest of all time. And I've seen Priest the last couple of times they've come through to Australia. And I tell you, when they play Turbo Lover, that's a showstopper. The crowd just get right into it and they respond to that song. And I don't know if they're being ironic, but they respond to that song more than, sort of Living After Midnight and some of the old chestnuts from the 70s. I think that's a great song. It's got a lot of slow build-up. Rob Halford with his minimalist vocals. The lyrics, it's his version of Little Red Corvette. It's the whole album is a lot of romance, sex, and it's very un-Judas Priest. It's a lot more personal. But I think Turbo Lover with the crunchy guitars and the synth is a Judas Priest song. Locked In, that's got a classy Priest riff. Private Property, again, another good riff. Parental Guidance is terrible. I agree. You've got these middle-aged blokes that are talking about, teenagers, turn the stereo down. It's a little bit embarrassing. Rock You All Around the World, that's like Status Quo Light. Out in the Cold, I think that's a great power black ballad. And again, this is where they use the textures, the synth guitar to make it actually heavy. On a lyrical basis, I think that's one of Rob Halford's most personal lyrics. And it comes across as, I think that's top shelf Judas Priest. Wild Night, Crazy Days, that's a fun track. Hot for Love is one of my favourites. Again, you've got that ZZ Top type of sequencer over a great sort of little guitar riff. And I think the lack of the chorus makes it interesting. And that's the thing about this album. It's going off the beaten track. And that's why a lot of the Priest fans thought, call the cops. This is not the four on the floor. But I think, it makes it a little bit more interesting. And then Reckless, which is a great track. You've got the traditional dual riffage of Judas Priest, and an interesting story, and I think they'd be kicking themselves, but that was offered to be put on the Top Gun soundtrack, and they knocked it back. Can you imagine what the Priest career would have been if they had that song on the Top Gun soundtrack that sold, 10 million? Instead, they took the option, we'll put it on Johnny B. Good, which absolutely flopped. So Judas Priest's career may have gone into a different tangent. But all in all, I think this is a sonically really brave, interesting album. Yeah, look, there's some dodgy lyrics and some dodgy songs, but I'm going to give it an 8.
Wow. All right.
Okay. All the way to an 8. So it's the highest review of the night so far. So last but certainly not least, David, why don't you give us your review of the album, and then when we're done, we can get into a group discussion about it.
Am I on? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Trying to unmute. First off, can you raise your hand if you've gone on YouTube and seen the Turbo commercials that they put on TV for this? Because if you haven't, they're hilarious.
I don't quite remember if I have or not. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there's like 2 or 3 of them, and they're funny. Shows Halford in the band's like camp value. Well, I think it's important for me to preface with saying that I became a real Judas Priest fan at the beginning of last summer. I did, like a couple of songs I was aware of, and it just wasn't the time that I was ready to dive in. And I started getting a hankering, I suppose, to want to go into 80s metal and whatnot, where for a while I just sort of was apprehensive to get into it because I just really appreciated 70s production values over 80s, but it grew on me. So I'm coming into this as sort of a newbie. And when I do that with a band that has this like legendary status with a long history, there's an overwhelming catalog here, I tend to want to do a lot of research and read up and read interviews and go all over Wikipedia and everything like that. And I also am very aware of coming into something on a certain timeline. I forgot who it was that mentioned it before. I'm not sure if it was Peter or not, but just speaking about how it's important about when you become a fan of a band or when you enter the timeline, it's not going to be sort of like influenced by, you're going to get a different influence than you would on where you want to go with it, for lack of a better term. But for a good example, 20 years ago, I got into Pink Floyd huge. Same thing, long catalog, overwhelming. When I read up on the history of Pink Floyd, where I went, it directly was where I saw that there was a giant fall off in either critical or commercial performance, or supposedly like the fall off period. I am very interested in going straight into that because I'm aware of when I'm a fan of an artist and I'm experiencing them in real time, it's different. It's different. You sort of like make concessions and you're like, oh, this album isn't that bad. And then afterwards you go back on it and you might, change your opinion on it. So I was very, very interested in finding out where these fall off periods were. So with Pink Floyd, I went straight into the Final Cut, which is a controversial album. And I really, really liked it a lot. Had I been a fan of the band, from the beginning, I probably would have had a different impression. So when I did the same research for Judas Priest, I went straight to Turbo because it's sort of a period where everybody just sort of is like, this is a very controversial period of time. And I wanted to have just a fresh take on it. And I ended up discovering it around like the beginning of the summertime, and I've been obsessed with this album since then. I did all the research on it, the entire thing about like twin turbos and how, you know, songs from Ram It Down were supposed to be on this, which, by the way, when John showed his the 30 package, I have no idea why they decided to make a bonus disc, the live concert for the Fuel for Life tour, the tour that was, you know, involved with Turbo, when I don't think Judas Priest, correct me if I'm wrong, have any other 80s live albums besides the Priest Live, which is of that same tour. So if they're going to do a live, you know, they're going to re-release a live concert, why pick that area? That seemed super redundant. They could have done what I think a lot of fans wanted and sort of come up with that imaginary album of the twin turbos. But I have, my first impressions when listening to this was, I'm not a big hair metal guy, and I like this. And it made me think, what if it takes a great band to pull off a certain style that is deemed unworthy, or you're just not into it? You know, I know some people that don't like, you know, heavy music, but they'll listen to Paul McCartney doing Helter Skelter, and they like that, but they don't want anything else to do with it. Maybe there's something there to be looked at, where I just happen to think that Priest is great, and they did this very well. Another thing that I think is really interesting is when you talk to people about this album, everybody has their own opinion on what they don't like about it. There's a bit of a consensus with the lyric, and I concede to that. I think that I would probably rather have them doing more sci-fi stuff or some more heavy stuff, even if they kept the same music. You know, Parental Guidance is a glaring example where it's kind of, I remember somebody said it's kind of like Sesame Street rock. But I think it's interesting when you find an album in the catalog where everybody some people don't have an issue with that, they have an issue with the synthesizers. I don't have an issue with the synths on it. I'm not always all about synths, but I happen to really enjoy this. The only time that I cringe during this entire album, really, is the chorus for Rock You All Around the World. Dead in the middle of the album. I just can't get into it. Other songs that I wasn't too crazy about in the beginning, like Hot for Love and Wild Nights, Hot and Crazy Days, they grew on me. I don't think that they're the greatest things, you know, since sliced bread, but they grew on me. But, you know, Turbo Lover, Locked In, Private Property, Out in the Cold, Reckless, all those songs I think are phenomenal. It's a fun album. I listened to this all summer long. It was just the right place at the right time. And then I started making it a personal project to go back and space out when I would listen to every other Priest album in chronological order. And I've been working on that, where I kind of, you know, letting certain songs are growing on me, certain ones aren't, but I'm very much impressed. The promise was there with this band. And I think it takes a really good band to pull something like this off. It's sort of around the same time, Ultimate Sin, Ozzy Osbourne. That's my favorite Ozzy album. I really, really think that has the production quality on it is rather well done. But yeah, music isn't science. I mean, people catch on to things differently than others. I just think it's interesting when someone's like, oh yeah, you know, Reckless isn't really that great. I really like, you know, Locked In a lot. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Reckless is so awesome. Reckless sort of sounds like it could have been on one of the previous like couple of albums compared to something, you know, like Turbo Lover. Also, as a final point, I think that the drums are kind of weak on this. I didn't notice it at first because I do like the song Turbo Lover quite a bit. It was one of my most played, if not most played song on Spotify last year, because I just listened to this album ad nauseum. But when I heard it, it was just like, do. I'm like, they could have done better with that. They could have been a little bit more dynamic with that. But yeah, this album, besides like, you know, the drums being a bit underwhelming, you know, some of the song Parental Guidance with the lyrics and Rock You All Around the World with the chorus, I'm going to give this album a 9 at least.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Okay.
it toggles between if it's not my favorite Priest album, and at this point I've listened to everything up until the 90s, it's toggling between number 1 and number 2 spot.
Okay. 9. Nice job.
You've done me.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so calculating the average here, looks like we have an average of 6.83.
Okay.
So we got some people who really like this album, and a couple people who think it's pretty good. A couple people falling in the middle there. But I think as a panel, we've all decided that we agree that we are for this Dark Horse album. So we can have So,
no, I want to go back how terrible this album is. And I've been a Priest fan, I know Martin too, way back. I missed the point of entry discussion. I think that was Judas Priest taking chances. I think this is Judas Priest just following a trend. And as I said, I listened to it for the first time in over 30 years, and I found it to be a little bit more listenable, but nah. Not good.
So
Yeah,
Joe,
I'll just
actually,
add a quick point on that as well. KK, it's funny. KK was the guy in the band that always seemed like ticked off that they weren't selling more records, that they weren't getting past that single platinum, double platinum plateau into, he's looking around at Ozzy selling a lot of records and Scorpions even doing kind of good. And then hair metal, a lot of those bands doing really good. So it really always stuck in his craw about this. And I agree with Joe. This is more of a, well, even Point of Entry was a definition of a sellout kind of album. They just acceded to what the label wanted, and they're kind of doing the same thing here. This is just them trying to sell a lot more records. Just one other point I wanted to make. What was it here? I loved Peter's point about the ZZ Top comparison with Hot for Love. I never really kind of noticed that or thought that, but I thought that was a really cool point. Good use of a sequence part in there.
I think they really wanted this album to translate to the dance floor, and that ZZ Top Eliminator album went to 10 million copies, multi-platinum worldwide, and I think they wanted to replicate that guitar over a sequencer and get people out on the dance floor and get that sort of crossover audience. I think they definitely wanted to go into that direction.
I want to ask the panel, so the original concept was to have a double album. So it would be this and not Painkiller, Ram It Down. Yeah. So how do you think that would have played out if that was done? And what exactly was the story why it was, they pulled back from that?
It was just too expensive. The label just thought it was, just too out there. And, frankly, I bet the label listened to all those songs and just realized that the songs aren't even that great. And the label, has purposely decided we're going to do the commercial ones. We're not going to do the heavy ones. I think we would have made a pretty lousy double album. I think people would have looked at it and said, double albums are usually like an elevated intellectual kind of thing, and it holds together and the sum is greater than the parts. And this would just sound like 40 parts 20 parts instead of 10 parts, right? And it just wouldn't have been that great. One last point I wanted to make. One thing about this album on Spotify, Turbo Lover has been played about 33 million times on Spotify. Every other song is around the 1 million mark, a couple up to 2, the rest down to 1 million. Spotify, this album is a forgotten album. I mean, it's not getting a lot of plays in the streaming era.
That's interesting. So Joe, I actually, just because I'm curious, when you mentioned that you thought that this album might not be so bad if it came from another band, and I've certainly experienced that with other albums and other bands where you're like, if it was any other band, I'd be okay with this, but because it's these guys and I love them so much, I'm not. What band do you think, if they had made this album, would it have been just a passable, this is fine, I'm okay with it? Is there a band in mind? Do you think that it sounds like? Do you think they're trying to copy or anything like that?
I'm thinking if Def Leppard would have released this instead of Hysteria, I would have liked it a little bit better. I'm thinking more in that direction. It would still be a 5 for me. Yeah. But it plays it. It's the same thing, a lot of my favorite bands, a lot of bands do this. But yeah, I came, I'm thinking about what happened to the band that, Sinner's probably in my top 10 all-time songs, especially on Unleashed, where it's a dual guitar just blows your mind. I'm like, what happened to this band?
It's still a very heavy album. Even with the synth, it builds up this soundscape. I still think, it's not muted. The guitars are not muted on this album. So you can still listen to the tracks on this album and think that's Priest. It's still got that riffage, that staccato, chugga chugga sound. You can tell it's Priest, but it's got that soundscape. And in some of those songs, it actually makes it heavy. It's just, I don't know. It's just, I guess, critics' corner on this one.
I think Martin's bringing up Scorpions too is a good example.
Yeah. And I can't picture this album being done by one of the young new hair metal bands, but I can picture it as a Quiet Riot or a Twisted Sister album. To me, it sounds like a 1984 hair metal album.
And I think it's really interesting what Martin said about KK and wanting greater success for the band. I mean, I guess if you kind of put yourself in his shoes, or really in anybody's shoes at that point, you've got Van Halen 1984 and you've got ZZ Top Eliminator, where bands took some really big chances with different instrumentation, and it really worked out for them, like in a crazy way. And so there probably was some within the Judas Priest camp, a train of thought that was like, maybe this will work for us.
I'm glad you brought up Van Halen, because 5150 was like released a week or two before this too. So it was kind of I don't know. This was a bad year for me. And if you go to my, that's why I love the PIL album, the Public Image, because it was so off the beaten track, because this stuff was just dragging me down. And then with the death of Cliff Burton and Metallica, I don't know. Not a good year of music for me, personally.
Yeah. Joe, just a quick question. Do you like pop music?
I do like pop music, and I appreciate it. Yeah. And as I've gotten older, I love Madonna. I love all different. Well, I'm also have a weakness for female singers, which is another episode, another day. Yeah, I appreciate all different types of music, especially as I've gotten older. Now, in the time frame back then, I was all about metal and.
So do you think if a band goes too far out of their wheelhouse and goes into pop, that's where it creates issues, especially if you've followed a band right from the start?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, my gateway band and Kiss, God, how many times have they followed trends and failed more than succeeded, to be honest. And I see more of that happening here with Judas Priest. That's where I'm at. They're just not being true to themselves here, in my estimation.
I think for me, I would think that with ZZ Top and Van Halen, with them taking the chances with 1984 and Eliminator, they had the videos. They had all the video play, which, what did Judas Priest have for videos in the 80s for the most part? It was You Got Another Thing Coming. They didn't really get a whole lot of video play from what my memory was from the early 80s. So I don't think they didn't have that on their side. So they tried to get to that way of, let's do something that's video minded rock. Cause I mean, let's think of the Locked In video. I mean, that looked like something like out of Road Warrior or something, or something like that. But, yeah, and it's still, I still don't think it worked that well for them, but
I think that's a good point, John. I mean, if think for example, if ZZ Top didn't have the videos, would enough people have heard Eliminator for that to have happened?
Yeah, that video actually conquered the world. Those videos, literally. But I didn't mention in my little slot that I was going to praise the Turbo video. It's quite an inventive little video. It's got the Ray Harryhausen models and the skeletons, and I think it's one of the best Judas Priest videos compared to some of the cheapies they used to do in the 70s. It didn't look like that they spent a fair amount of coin on it. Anyway.
I want to say something too about the cover, if I can turn into a 14-year-old boy for a minute. I think the cover is really cool. I don't really have any critique of it. I just like it a lot.
But the
I don't know if I'm
colors
the
are
only
really
one that
muted,
likes
right?
it,
The colors are muted. None of them are bright, and the color palette isn't that great. I mean, compared to Screamin' was amazing. When you saw that for the first time with the yellow, it's like boom, right?
Can I just say to Joe, because I know that we kind of have the polar ends of critiques on this album. I would be a hypocrite if I didn't, express that I totally see where you're coming from with this.
Well, I'm glad you brought up timeline too, because that plays a lot into it as well. If you jump into it at a certain point and you like something, you like it. I jumped in at Unleashed in the East and then went back to Stained Class and Sin After Sin. So that was the band I, liked, and that's where I jumped in.
That was one of the questions I was going to have for you, exactly where you had jumped in. Because I remember being in high school and my heroes, the artists that I was listening to started, making albums that are considered the more commercial stuff. And I just threw my hands up and I was like, screw this. Like, this sucks. Like, so I know exactly what you mean by that. And then, 10, 20 years later, people on YouTube talking about those albums like they're classics. And I'm like, no. There was a shift. The stuff before that was awesome. That was a completely different, like, contrived thing. Sinner is probably my favorite Judas Priest song. Let me just say that. I love that song. That I will never get tired of that song. So I'm with you on that, like, as far as that goes. But yeah, I was curious to see when exactly you jumped in to see how things progressed and how you felt about, I'm assuming that Unleashed in the East was brand new when you got it.
Yeah, so they were playing, well, it was Hellbent for Leather and Unleashed in the East. They played, you heard Green Man Alicia on the radio, and you go from there. And then, my cousin and I were really into it, and we just went to the back catalog from there. And then British Steel broke quite a bit here in the States. So so it started at that, Hellbent for Leather, Unleashed in the East era.
Nick, why don't we wrap up with 3 favorite Judas Priest songs of all time from everybody?
Ooh, that sounds like a good idea. All right, let's go one by one. Martin, we'll do you last this time since you got to give your review first. So, right. David, let's start with you.
Oh boy, that's tough. I have to go with what I'm really vibing on now. So I'm gonna say, since I already said Sinner, I gotta say that. I really like Some Heads Are Gonna Roll. I think that song is awesome. I realize that they didn't write that, or I don't know if it's co-write or whatever it is, but I'm a big fan of that one. And Metal Gods, definitely. I won't mention anything. I already talked praise of this album, Turbo. So yeah, those I could just listen to on repeat over and over and over again. This is a lot, man. I'm still new to this, so some of this stuff hasn't gotten played out to me yet,
All right. Todd, why don't you give us your 3?
I'm going to go with Exciter and Last Rose of Summer and kind of a dark horse, No Surrender. I love No Surrender. Their best bridge. I love that song.
Awesome. All right. Joe, you're up next.
You put me on this is where I get really nervous, and I just did Ryan's show where I had to list my top 10 albums, and this is going to change tomorrow. But definitely number 1 is Sinner, and then I would say number 2 as of today is Burning Up off of Hellbent for Leather. That song just kicks ass. Number 3, oh my word, I don't know. There's so many great songs. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with Steeler off of British Steel right now, because that just is a jam for me. But that's gonna change in 5 minutes.
All right. Well, we'll come back to you in 5 minutes. Then you can give us your next list. Peter, why don't we go with you next?
Yeah, wow. Rapid Fire, I think that's a great opening track. I'll agree with you, Joe. I think Steeler is a crack song. What a finisher on that album. And I like Screaming for Vengeance. I think it's a great song too. And there's so many, but that's 3 at the moment.
Awesome. All right, John, you're up.
Exciter for sure. Reckless. I would be. I mean, after I praised it so much with it as a battle cry. And for me, Bloodstone.
Awesome. All right, Martin, why don't you close us up here then? What are your top three?
All right, you might detect a theme here: delivering the goods, burning up, and running wild.
All right.
For those of you who don't know, they're all off the same album. So.
Saints in Hell just went into my number 3 spot. I'm going over the candle now.
Cool.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a couple minutes left. If anyone wants to have any last discussions, I got some things that I promised Marco that I would talk about, specifically the Patreon, the YouTube channel. So for everyone who's watching, because these episodes do go out on YouTube. So for all you audience members who are out there in YouTube land, if you want to be part of these discussions, if you want to get in on the fun and get your voice heard and join this awesome group of people who get to, talk about their favorite albums and sometimes their least favorite albums, you can join the Patreon and you can get in on these discussions. There's also a Ko-fi and a Teespring. And no, not Teespring, TeePublic. There we go. That's the right one. And you can also support the channel by liking and subscribing. I want to thank everyone who has supported the Patreon so far, who supported the Ko-fi, just supported the Contrarians in any way that they can. And I want to thank everyone who came here tonight. You guys all had great things to say. As a whole, the panel, for the most part, has accepted this album, except for our holdout Joe here, who is bravely battling everyone against it. And Martin, if you got any last words there before we, I guess, close it up?
No, that's it, I guess. Thanks again, guys, for a great panel, and let's keep doing these. This is kind of one of my favorite parts of the whole Contrarians deal. So I love doing this stuff. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys all again next time.
And don't forget to get Tim Derling's Unspooled.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome book. Awesome bundle package.
Yeah. Glad to see yours has shown up. Excellent. All right, guys. Thanks again. We'll talk to you later.